State of emergency has been declared in Sri Lanka. A curfew has been declared across the island. Thousands of people came out on the streets and started protesting. There is a scarcity of fuel and food in the entire Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is facing a never before the major economic crisis. What are the reasons behind it? Let's look into. Hi, my name is Jithendar and I am on a mission to help entrepreneurs with financial advice to build a profitable business. Sri Lanka, a country of 22 million people, is under the grip of an unprecedented economic turmoil, the worst in 7 decades. Crippled by an acute shortage of foreign exchange that has left it struggling to pay for essential imports of fuel and other essentials. It runs out of money to pay for fuel and medicine. The island is relying on help from neighboring India, China, and from the International Monetary Fund. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who took office in May, said the economy was heading for rock bottom. Sri Lankans are skipping meals as they line up for hours to buy scarce fuel and cooking gas. The government owes $51 billion and is unable to make interest payments on its loans. Tourism, an important engine of economic growth, sputtered because of the pandemic. Country's currency has collapsed by 80%, making imports more expensive and worsening inflation. The finance ministry says Sri Lanka has only $25 million in usable foreign reserves and needs $6 billion to stay afloat for next 6 months. The result is a country on the edge of a bankruptcy, with hardly any money to import fuel, milk, medicine, and even toilet paper. How did it come to this? Analyst says economic mismanagement by successive governments weakened Sri Lanka's public finances. Situation was increased by deep tax cuts enacted by Rajapaksa government soon after it took office in 2019. Months later, the COVID-19 pandemic struck, wiping out much of Sri Lanka's revenue base, mainly from tourism. Remittance from nationals working abroad dropped, forcing the government to draw from foreign exchange reserves. Fuel shortages led to long queues at filling stations as well as frequent blackouts. Hospitals ran short of medicines. Runaway inflation reached 54.6% last month and could rise to 70%, the central bank said. What did the government do? Despite the rapidly deteriorating economic crisis, the Rajapaksa government initially held off talks with the IMF. For months, opposition leaders and experts urged the government to act, but it held its ground, hoping tourism would bounce back. Much of public anger is focused on President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his brother, ex-Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa. In April 21, the president banned imports of chemical fertilizers, a move that decimated staple rice crop, driving prices higher. Eventually, the government sought help from India and China, regional powers looking for influence over the island. India says it provided support worth over $3.5 billion this year. China intervened less publicly, but said it supports the nation's efforts to restructure its debt. Sri Lanka eventually opened talks with the IMF. So what are the lessons to be learned? Number 1, strengthen safety nets to mitigate poverty and political instability. Sri Lanka has a British-style welfare system, providing free healthcare and education as well as a Samurdhi poverty reduction initiative for 1.2 million families. However, these mechanisms were insufficient to stop growing poverty and social discontent over rising food inflation and shortage of food and fuel. In an ideal world, a temporary rationing system for basic food and fuel should be introduced early in a crisis, followed by donor-funded cash transfers targeted to the poorest. Number 2, a strong macroeconomic and financial regulatory structure is necessary to reduce the economic cost of a crisis. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka lies at the heart of Sri Lanka's regulatory structure. However, a lack of autonomy means that the central bank's monetary policy and exchange rate decisions were influenced by short-term political pressures. Not only the governor of the central bank appointed by the Sri Lanka president for a 6-year term, but the monetary board which manages the central banks, includes the secretary of the treasury, were appointed by him. In ideal world, the governor would be appointed by the president on the recommendation of a group of eminent persons like a constitution council without any parliamentarians. Number 3, conduct honest public communication to avoid the spread of misinformation. Historically, ineffective government communication has resulted in considerable public confusion and misunderstanding about Sri Lanka's crisis and the IMF program. The public has tended to rely on social media, which has provided variable quality data and analysis. In an ideal world, a lean government information unit would be created, staffed by media professionals dedicated to honest messaging about the economy. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to economic crisis management. These lessons from Sri Lanka's experience should be tailor-made to the circumstances of others facing similar circumstances. I hope this video gives an overview of the Sri Lanka crisis. If you find this content useful, do share it with your friends. For more informative content like this, do subscribe to my channel. This is Jithendar Patel signing out. See you in my next video.